I hid in my son's car to surprise him, but who sat next to him shattered me. I didn't plan to become the kind of woman who hides in the back seat of her own son's car, clutching a dish of homemade dessert like it's a ticket back to simpler years. I planned to be the kind of mother who shows up with chocolate cake and gets hugged so tightly her ribs complain. I planned to see my son's face brighten the way it used to when he was little, and I'd come home with a surprise after a long day. I planned all of that, right up until the moment I heard my daughter-in-law ask the question that turned my blood to ice.My name is Lydia Monroe. I was 62 when that afternoon happened, and I had lived long enough to know life could be unfair, but not long enough to imagine the cruelty could wear on my own family's faces. It started with an ordinary urge to do something sweet. Javier had always loved chocolate cake, the kind that smells like warm cocoa and comfort, the kind you eat with a spoon straight from the pan when nobody's looking. I made it the way I always did, by memory, because the recipe lived in my hands more than it lived on paper. I wrapped it carefully, wiped my floury fingerprints off the container, and drove to his office like a woman with nothing to fear. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. The parking lot was wide and bright, the kind that bakes under the sun and makes the air shimmer. I saw his silver sedan tucked into a corner spot and felt a childish spark of mischief that made me smile. I could surprise him. I could hide in the back seat the way children hide at parties and jump out laughing. It could be fun. I could remind him, and maybe myself, that I still mattered to him in the way I used to. His car was unlocked. Careless, I thought, but I didn't scold him in my head the way I used to. I just slipped inside. The leather was warm from the sun. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly, mixed with the clean, sharp smell of the car's air freshener. I eased into the back, crouching low behind the front seats. The cake sat against my knees like a secret. I waited, listening. A distant door slam. A few scattered voices. Footsteps that weren't his. Then more footsteps. Closer, steady, purposeful. My heart kicked up with excitement as the car doors opened. Javier slid into the driver's seat. I could tell by the shift of weight and the familiar way he adjusted himself. And then, another person entered. The passenger door shut with a decisive thud. It first. My thoughts were harmless. Coworker, friend, someone he was giving a ride. But when the woman spoke, the sound of her voice pulled the breath right out of me. Raquel. His wife. A small part of me softened automatically. How nice, I thought, that they were leaving together. Maybe they'd been busy. Maybe that was why they hadn't visited much. Maybe this was just adulthood, schedules and responsibilities, and a life that doesn't circle around your mother anymore. Then Raquel's tone changed. Are you absolutely sure no one will suspect anything when it happens? She asked. There are words that don't sound dangerous until you hear them in a certain voice. Her voice wasn't playful. I wasn't concerned. It was cool, businesslike, as if she were confirming a dinner reservation. Javier's answer came quickly, impatiently, as if this was a conversation he'd grown tired of repeating. Raquel, we've talked about this 1,000 times. The plan is perfect. Mom will have a very natural, very believable accident. No one is going to question it when a woman her age slips on the stairs in her old house. My mind tried to reject the sentence the way the body rejects spoiled food. I felt a surge of disbelief so strong it was almost physical. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely he meant something else. Surely this was about someone else's mother, some legal case, some hypothetical. But then he said, Mom, and I knew there was no other person he could mean. I pressed myself tighter into the shadow behind the seat, my hands frozen around the dessert container. The cake suddenly felt ridiculous, like a child's offering placed on the altar of something evil. Raquel spoke again, and the cruelty in her words made my skin prickle. And after the funeral, when everything calms down, we can sell that old house and move into the subdivision we've always wanted. With the $200,000 that property is worth, plus the savings she's put away, we can finally live like we should. $200,000 savings. Funeral. The words dropped one after another, heavy and final, stacking into a shape my mind didn't want to recognize. Javier let out a sound that might have been agreement, might have been relief. Yeah, he said, like they were talking about clearing out a storage unit. It'll solve everything. My throat tightened so hard I thought I might cough. I didn't. I didn't breathe properly either. I just stayed there, small and silent, listening to my son discuss my death as if it were a step in a financial plan. Raquel, emboldened by his tone, added more. Alvin and Patricia are on board, right? When she said my brother's name, it felt like the last thread holding me up snapped. Alvin, my own brother. Not just my son and his wife, but family I'd shared childhood with, people whose faces lived inside my history. My world didn't just crack, it shifted, like a foundation giving way under a house. Javier replied with certainty. Yeah. Uncle Alvin needs money. Patricia's been talking about it non-stop. They're ready. Raquel gave a small laugh, a sound without warmth. Patricia always says your mother's been stingy. That it's time the family got what they deserve. Stingy. If I could have stood up at that moment, I would have demanded they explain what that word meant. Stingy, from a woman who had never known what it was to choose between a bill and groceries. Stingy, from a brother who had turned his back on me when I asked for help and then mocked me for surviving without him. Stingy, when every dollar I'd saved was a dollar I'd bled out of my own youth. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I was pinned in place by a fear that had nothing to do with being discovered and everything to do with what I had just learned. Javier's voice went quieter, careful, as if he were listing items from a checklist. The insurance will help too. That's another 100,000. Insurance. I felt my stomach drop, as if my body finally understood the danger my mind had been refusing to accept. They kept talking, and the details became worse, less like angry fantasies and more like a planned action. They discussed timing, the need for it to look accidental, the importance of acting heartbroken. They even joked about what they'd say to other people, how they'd frame it as a tragedy that no one could have prevented. I wanted to cover my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst out of the back seat and demand to know who this man was wearing my son's voice. But something inside me, older than fear, older than mother love, held me still. A survival instinct I didn't know I had whispered. Stay quiet. Learn everything. Live. Eventually, the doors opened again. They got out. Their footsteps faded. The car sat empty, silent, like nothing had happened. I stayed crouched for what felt like hours, though it was probably 10 minutes. My muscles trembled. My breath came in shallow pulls. When I finally moved, I did it slowly, listening for any sign they'd come back. When I climbed out, the world looked the same. Sunlight on pavement, distant voices, the smell of hot asphalt. But I was not the same woman who had slipped into that car. I carried the cake back to my own car like a fragile lie and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. My hands shook too much. Tears blurred my vision, but they didn't spill loudly. I couldn't afford loud music. On the drive home, I went through the memories that had built my life with Javier, as if my mind were proving to itself that this betrayal was real by replaying the love that came before it. My husband, Robert, died when Javier was 8. The way my son's small hands had gripped my shirt at the funeral, his face pressed into my side like he could anchor himself to me. The way I'd promised, without even speaking, that I would keep him safe. I had tried. After Robert's accident, the world became a series of days measured in exhaustion. I had no college degree, no safety net, no one to rescue me. I cleaned houses, offices, anything I could find. I learned which chemicals burned your skin if you didn't wear gloves, and which stains needed patience instead of force. I learned to wake up before dawn and still smile at a child who needed breakfast and encouragement. I learned to be 2 parents while feeling like I had the strength of half of one. Javier was smart. Everyone said it. Teachers would stop me after school, their expressions almost reverent when they talked about him. They told me he could go far if he had the chance. Those words lit a fire in me that never went out. I made his future my religion. I saved everything. I skipped everything. When other women bought themselves small comforts, I learned to live without them. When bills came, I paid them and then stretched what was left until it barely covered food. When Javier needed something for school, a calculator, a uniform, a book, I found a way, even if it meant my own needs became invisible. When he was 15 and needed a computer, I stared at the price like it was written in another language. 3 months of work for a machine that would be outdated in a few years. But he needed it, and I wanted him to stand beside kids who had never worried about money. So I sold the last piece of jewelry that had meant something to me. I didn't tell him. I smiled when he opened the box. I told him he deserved it. When he got accepted into a program that would cost more than I'd ever held in my hands at one time, I asked Alvin for help. It wasn't easy for me to ask. Pride is heavy, even when you're desperate. I told my brother I'd pay him back. I told him it was an investment in Javier's future. Alvin had looked at me like I was asking him to finance a dream too big for people like us. He told me no. He told me Javier should get a job and stop imagining he'd become something fancy. The refusal stung, but it didn't stop me. I took more work. I worked mornings and nights, weekends, holidays. I sold homemade food and learned to smile at strangers while my feet ached. I kept going because I believed that if I could just get Javier through school, life would soften. And it did. For him, he became a lawyer. He stepped into a world of suits and polished offices and people who spoke as if struggle was something you read about, not something you lived. His first paycheck was more than I'd made in months, and I cried, proud and relieved, like I could finally unclench my fists after decades of holding on. Then Raquel entered the picture. She came from money, real money, the kind that buys silence and comfort and the illusion that hardship is optional. She was polite to me, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. When she walked into my home, she looked at the worn furniture and the chipped paint and the small kitchen like she was visiting a museum exhibit called How Some People Live. She never insulted me directly, but she didn't have to. Her posture did it for her. Still, I tried. I tried to be welcoming, to be generous with what little I had. When they planned their wedding, Raquel wanted elegance, a display. I gave what I could, even when it drained me, because I thought it would secure my place in their lives. I thought love could be proven by sacrifice. After the wedding, Javier visited less. Excuses piled up: work, social events, trips with Raquel's family. When they did come, they talked about restaurants I'd never heard of and neighborhoods I couldn't picture. Raquel spoke about standards and the life we want, and Javier nodded like he'd forgotten where he came from. And the months leading up to the afternoon in the car, their questions had changed. They asked about the house, its value, its condition, what I planned to do with it. They asked about savings, about insurance, about paperwork. I told myself it was a concern. I told myself it was adulthood. I told myself not to be suspicious of my own child. But suspicion had found me anyway, crouched behind the front seat with a cake in my LAPD. By the time I pulled into my driveway that day, my hands were steady again. Not because I was calm, but because something inside me had shifted into a colder place. The house stood there as it always had, a little worn, a little stubborn, a place built from endurance. I carried the dessert inside and set it on the counter without opening it. I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house creak, listening to the wind, listening to my own heartbeat as if it were trying to warn me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Javier's voice describing my death as believable. I heard Raquel treating my life like an obstacle to their upgrade. Near dawn, when the sky turned from black to bruised gray, I sat up and made myself a promise I had never thought I'd need to make. If they were planning something, I would not walk into it blind. If they wanted to turn my life into their payday, they would have to deal with a version of me they didn't know existed. And in the quiet of my kitchen, with the untouched cake sitting like a symbol of everything I'd given, I decided I would start watching them the way they had been watching me. Not as a mother, as a woman who intended to live. The first thing I learned after that afternoon in the car was that fear is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and practical. Sometimes it makes coffee the way it always does, washes dishes, folds laundry, and nods politely on the phone while every muscle underneath the calm is coiled like a wire. I moved through the next morning like a woman wearing her own skin as a disguise. I did not call Javier. I did not accuse him. I did not cry to anyone. I didn't even let myself fall apart in the shower the way I wanted to, because grief felt like a luxury and shock felt like a trap. I had no proof, only words I had overheard, and a mother's instinct kept whispering the most dangerous thought of all. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you're losing your mind. But the other part of me, the part that had survived widowhood and exhaustion and decades of work that scraped the softness off my hands, didn't believe in comforting lies. That part of me believed in patterns. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it, so I began to watch. Not in a dramatic way at first. I told myself I was just paying attention. I told myself I was simply noticing what I had ignored for months because love had made me blind. When Javier called, I listened for what he asked, not what he said. When Raquel spoke, I watched the way her eyes moved around my home like she was mentally pricing it. When they visited, I started keeping track of small things. What time they arrived, how long they stayed, what questions they slipped into conversation as if they were casual. For the first few days, all I did was think. The mind can be a cruel place when it has too much silence. I sat at the kitchen table and replayed memory after memory, hunting for the moment my son became someone who could discuss my death the way he'd discuss a change in interest rates. I wondered if it had happened gradually, like rot, or suddenly, like a switch. Then I made myself do something I had never done in 62 years. I stopped trusting that being good would keep me safe. On the fourth day, I drove past Javier and Raquel's apartment in the early morning. I parked far enough away that I didn't feel ridiculous, far enough away that I could pretend I was only there by coincidence, and I watched their building as if it were a television show. When they came out, I learned something immediately. They looked tired. Not the tired you earn from honest work, but the tight, restless tired that comes from too much worry and too little control. Javier's jaw was tense, his shoulders lifted slightly, like he was bracing for impact. Raquel walked with her usual sharpness, but she kept checking her phone, her lips pressed together in irritation. They climbed into their car and drove off, and I followed at a distance that made my heart race. I was not a detective. I was a 62-year-old woman in an old car, watching the life I had built for someone else become a threat to my own. They went to a coffee shop first. I stayed down the street, pretending to adjust something in my glove compartment, and watched them through the windshield. They didn't sit close. They didn't laugh. They looked like business partners in a crisis. When they left, they drove to a bank. That was the first day I saw Javier argue with someone without raising his voice. He stood outside the bank after the appointment, phone to his ear, and his face tightened in a way that told me more than words ever could. He paced, dragged a hand over his hair, and spoke in short, clipped sentences. Even from a distance I could feel the pressure leaking off him like heat. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the shape of the conversation. The desperation. The bargaining. The attempt to sound in control while being cornered. Debt, I thought. And the more I watched, the more that suspicion solidified into certainty. Their spending, which I had once told myself was simply their lifestyle, began to look less like comfort and more like a costume they couldn't afford. They went to restaurants where the parking lot was full of expensive cars. Raquel walked out of a boutique with a bag that looked like it held something small and unnecessary and very, very expensive. Javier swiped a card at a gas station and then stared at the receipt for longer than he should have, as if calculating what that number meant. Night, when I returned home, I sat in my living room and tried to line up the facts like tiles on a table. Javier earned good money, yes. But even good money can drown under bad choices. Rent, restaurants, shopping, loans, social obligations, and whatever pressures Raquel carried from her world of appearances. A life can look glamorous and still be collapsing from the inside. And then, by accident, I found the first real thread. I ran into a woman from my neighborhood at the grocery store, someone who had once worked in the same building as Javier. She greeted me warmly, asked about my health, and then, with the casual cruelty of people who don't know they're holding a knife, said, "I heard Javier's been stressed. Work trouble." My stomach turned. Work trouble. I repeated. She shrugged. That's what people were saying. Something about finances. You know how rumors are. Rumors. I drove home with that word circling in my head, and by the time I reached my driveway I knew what I needed next, confirmation. So I did the next thing I never thought I would do. I listened at doors. It sounds ugly when I write it that way, but there's no prettier version. One afternoon, I went to the office building where Patricia worked under the excuse of dropping off a small package for someone I used to clean for years ago. The receptionist didn't recognize me. I walked the hallway like I belonged there, like I wasn't trembling inside my own bones. Patricia's office door was slightly open. I should have turned around. I should have walked away and told myself I had no right. But the moment I heard my own name, my body moved without permission, stopping in the shadow just beyond the doorway. Lydia has always been so selfish with her money, Patricia's voice said, sharp and satisfied, like she was enjoying the taste of the words. Alvin is right. It's time for the family to get what we deserve. That stingy old woman is going to die sooner or later. Why wait? I gripped the wall so hard my fingers hurt. Patricia continued, talking to someone on the phone. Alvin lost his job 3 months ago, and we haven't been able to pay the mortgage. We're drowning. But Javier and Raquel have it under control. This is going to fix everything. Fix everything. There it was, the word that made it all click into place, like a lock turning to them. My death wasn't a tragedy. It was a solution. I backed away before my breathing could betray me and left the building with my heart pounding so loud I thought the receptionist would hear it. The sun outside was too bright. People walked by laughing, living ordinary lives. I felt like I was moving through a world that had split in half, one side full of normalcy, the other side full of something rotten. That night, I went to Alvin's house. Not politely. Not with warning. I drove there and knocked on the door like I had a right to answer, because I did. Alvin opened it, and the surprise on his face flickered quickly into something else, something guarded. He didn't invite me in right away, which told me more than any greeting could have. Lydia, he said, forcing cheer that didn't fit. What are you doing here? I need to talk, I replied, keeping my voice steady. May I come in? He hesitated just long enough to confirm my instincts, then stepped aside. Patricia was in the living room, watching television, her posture relaxed like she owned the place. When she saw me, her mouth tightened into a smile that wasn't friendly. I sat down because if I stood, I might shake. Alvin, I said, and my own calm surprised me. Is it true you lost your job? His face flushed red, and Patricia snapped off the television like it was suddenly an inconvenient noise. How did you? Alvin began. It doesn't matter, I interrupted. What matters is you didn't tell me. You're my brother. Patricia let out a small, bitter laugh. Oh, now she cares, she muttered that I ignored her. Why didn't you ask me for help, Alvin? If you're struggling, you could have come to me. Alvin's eyes narrowed. Help, he repeated, and the word came out as if it tasted bad. Like charity? It wouldn't be charity, I said. It would be family. Patricia leaned forward, her expression sharp. Family, she echoed. You mean the way you treated your family when you were pouring money into Javier? My chest tightened. I did what I had to do for my son. And what about everyone else? Patricia snapped. You always had something for him. Always. But for Alvin? For us? Nothing. That's not true, I said, though a part of me already knew logic wouldn't matter in this room. Alvin stood up abruptly, anger rising like a wave. You've been hoarding money for years while the rest of us struggled, he said. Don't act innocent now. Hoarding. I repeated, and the word hit me like a slap. I worked myself into the ground. I saved so I wouldn't become a burden. I was saved because life doesn't forgive people who have nothing. Patricia's eyes glittered. And now you're finally going to stop pretending that money is only yours. A chill moved through me. What do you mean by that? Alvin and Patricia exchanged a look, a quick, practiced communication that made my stomach drop. They had rehearsed this. They had talked about me like I was an object, like I wasn't standing right there. I forced myself to keep my voice calm. Alvin, if you need money, I can lend you $10,000 right now. The offer felt like tossing a lifeline into storm water. I didn't want to believe the worst. I wanted to see if there was any way to turn this into something less deadly. Patricia scoffed. 10,000, she said, as if I had offered her a handful of loose change. Lydia, don't insult us. Alvin's jaw clenched. We know how much you have, he said, and my heartbeat stumbled. What? Patricia's smile widened, cold and certain. The house is worth 200,000, she said, ticking it off like items on a list. You've got savings. You've got life insurance. And you sit there acting like 10,000 is generous. The room tilted. I stared at her, my skin prickling. How did she know? How did they know the numbers so cleanly? I stood up, my legs unsteady. That's enough, I said quietly. Alvin took a step toward me. Lydia, wait. No, I interrupted, and the firmness in my own voice startled me. I think I understand now. I walked out without another word, my hands shaking as I gripped my keys. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard as if I'd been running. My house, once my refuge, suddenly felt like a stage where something terrible was being planned. I looked at the stairs, my stairs, and for the first time in my life, I saw them the way Javier had described them, as an accident waiting to happen. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down everything I could remember. Dates, phrases, names. The way Raquel's voice sounded when she said, "When it happens." The way Javier had said, "Believable." Patricia's tone when she said, "Why wait?" I wrote until my hand cramped, because writing made it real, and if it was real, I could fight it. The next morning Javier called. His voice was warmer than usual, almost syrupy. "Mom," he said, "Raquel and I want to take you out to dinner. That Italian place you like. We haven't had family time in a while." My stomach tightened so sharply I thought I might be sick. But I answered the way a trusting mother would. "That sounds lovely, Mijo." "Great," he said quickly. "Friday at 7. And, Mom, wear your green dress. The one you look so nice in." The detail made my skin crawl. I hung up and stared at the phone. That a dinner invitation could be nothing. It could be guilt. It could be a performance. Or it could be a test. Friday came like a shadow stretching across the week. I dressed carefully, not because I wanted to look pretty, but because I wanted to look alert. I wore the green dress, fixed my hair, and applied lipstick with hands that barely trembled. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the soft mother who used to beam with pride. I saw a woman trying to memorize her own face in case someone tried to erase it. They arrived on time. Javier hugged me a second longer than usual, his arms tight like he was proving something to himself. Raquel smiled brightly, almost cheerful, and her calm unsettled me more than Javier's nerves. In the car, they talked about harmless things. Work, traffic, a new restaurant Raquel wanted to try. Their words floated on the surface while something heavier lived underneath. The restaurant. Raquel insisted I order the most expensive dish. "Tonight is on us," she said sweetly. "Order whatever you want." It would have felt generous if I didn't know what they were planning to take. During dinner, the questions began. "How have you been feeling lately?" Javier asked. "Any dizziness? Trouble with the stairs?" Raquel leaned in. "You shouldn't be alone in that house, Lydia. Those stairs are steep." The word stairs landed between us like a stone. "I'm fine," I said lightly. "I've lived there for years." "Accidents happen," Raquel replied, and she said it the way someone tests a word for fit. Then Javier asked, "Have you updated your will lately?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I forced a small laugh. "Why are you talking like that?" "I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, too fast. "Of course not. We just want everything to be organized." Raquel added smoothly, "Javier could help you review it. He's a lawyer. We want your wishes protected." Protected, I looked at my son and felt something in me harden. They weren't inviting me to dinner out of love. They were checking boxes. They drove me home afterward, and when we reached my steps, Javier took my arm. "Careful," he said. "It's dark. You could trip." Inside, Raquel walked through the house like she was already imagining it empty. She pointed out the rug at the top of the stairs. She commented on lighting. Javier nodded along, adding suggestions like he was doing me a favor. When they finally left, I closed the door and slid the lock into place with shaking hands. I stood in the hallway, staring at the staircase, and the truth settled over me like heavy cloth. They were getting ready, and I could not wait for them to decide the day my life ended. That night, with my notebook open and my pen poised, I wrote one final sentence. The kind that changes a person the moment it's written. I will not die on their schedule. And for the first time since I overheard them in that car, I didn't feel only feared. I felt the beginning of a plan. The next morning, I moved through my house as if it belonged to someone else. Every object felt unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because I had. The staircase looked steeper. The rug at the top looked like a trap. The handrail felt less like support and more like a prop in a scene someone else had rehearsed. I kept hearing Javier's voice in my head, natural, believable, accident, like a chant that turned my home into a threat. I knew one thing with sharp clarity. If I acted frightened, they would adjust. If I acted angry, they would deny. If I acted like I knew too much, they might rush. So I did the only thing that had ever kept me alive through hard years. I became practical. I took down the loose rug myself and rolled it tight, not because it would save me, but because I refused to let them be right about anything. I replaced the light bulb over the stairs and added a second lamp in the hallway. I put a small bell on the back door so I would hear if anyone entered quietly. I checked the locks twice before bed. Each small action was a stitch in a torn seam. It didn't fix the fabric, but it kept it from unraveling in the night. Then I opened my notebook and wrote what mattered most. Names, dates, phrases, questions, patterns. I wrote as if a judge were already reading it. I wrote as if my life depended on the way I described it, because it might. But paper is only paper, and suspicion is only suspicion, and I had no witness except my own ears and my own terror. The thought of walking into a police station with nothing but a story made my stomach twist. Who would believe a 62-year-old woman saying her own son planned to kill her for money? Who wouldn't assume I was confused, dramatic, bitter, unwell? That was the part that hurt the most. Not just that Javier had become dangerous, but that the world might not even take my fear seriously because it wore the face of motherhood. Mothers are expected to forgive, to excuse, to love no matter what. Mothers are expected to be safe. I needed someone who could see the truth without the soft filter of family. Someone who could look at me and not see mom first, but see woman in danger. There was only one person in my life I trusted with that kind of truth. Beatrice lived 2 houses down, a small woman with steady eyes and the kind of voice that could calm an entire room. She had been a nurse for most of her life, and even after retirement, she carried that quiet authority, like someone who had seen enough suffering to stop being impressed by melodrama. We had been friends for more than 20 years, sharing coffee, sharing neighborhood gossip, sharing the small burdens that build up in ordinary lives. If I told her, she wouldn't laugh. If I told her, she wouldn't tell me to just talk to him. If I told her, she would ask the right questions. I waited until late morning when the street was quiet. I didn't want curious neighbors noticing my urgency. I walked to her house with my shoulders squared, the way I used to walk into a new cleaning job when I didn't know if the people inside would treat me kindly or like furniture. Beatrice opened the door and her face changed immediately. "Lydia," she said, and she didn't smile. "What's wrong?" I tried to speak, but the first words stuck in my throat. For a moment, the weight of everything, years of sacrifice, the betrayal, the fear, pressed down so hard I thought I might collapse right there on her doorstep. Beatrice didn't wait for me to find language. She took my arm gently and guided me inside. "Sit," she said. It wasn't a suggestion. We sat at a kitchen table, the same table where we had laughed about silly things and complained about aching knees and discussed recipes. Her kitchen smelled like tea and lemon cleaner. It felt safe in a way my own house suddenly didn't. Beatrice poured water, slid it toward me, and watched my face the way nurses watch patients, reading what isn't being said. "Tell me," she said. I inhaled slowly, forcing my voice to stay steady. I overheard something, I began. Something I wasn't supposed to hear. Her eyes stayed on mine. Go on. And then the story came out of me in a rush, as if holding it in had been poisoning me. I told her about the cake, the parking lot, and hiding in the back seat. I told her about Javier's voice, Raquel's voice, the way they spoke about my death like it was a project. I told her about Alvin and Patricia, about the numbers they knew, about the dinner, about the stare comments and the will questions. When I finished, I realized I was shaking. Beatrice didn't interrupt. She didn't fill the silence with comfort. She just listened, and when the last word left my mouth, her face tightened with something that looked like anger. My God, she said softly. Lydia, this is monstrous. I waited for her to say I was overreacting. I waited for her to offer some gentle excuse, something like stress or misunderstanding. But she didn't. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes sharp. Do you have proof? No, I admitted, and it felt like a weakness. Only what I heard. Only what I've seen. Beatrice nodded once. Then we get proof. The way she said it, flat, decisive, made my breath catch. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was a direction, and direction is what fear turns into when you refuse to be helpless. I don't know how, I whispered. Beatrice reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was warm, her grip firm. You don't do this alone, she said. First thing, you stop thinking like a mother who's embarrassed to believe something terrible. You start thinking like a person who's protecting herself. Protecting myself. The phrase felt strange in my mouth, like I was tasting it for the first time. Beatrice started asking questions. Practical questions. When had they talked about the stairs? How often had they asked about money? Did anyone have access to my documents? Did Javier have keys? Did Raquel? Had Alvin ever visited when I wasn't home? Each question carved the problem into pieces small enough to hold. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. What do you want to happen, Lydia? I stared at her. I want to be safe, I said. I want them to stop. Beatrice nodded. And do you want them exposed? Do you want consequences? The word consequences sent a shiver through me. Because part of me, deep down, still had the reflex of protecting Javier, even as he threatened me. Love doesn't die neatly. It lingers like a ghost. I don't know, I admitted. Beatrice's eyes softened just slightly. That's normal, she said. But you may not get to choose everything. Once someone decides to harm you, your choices get smaller. Our job is to make them big again. I swallowed hard. How? Beatrice leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. There are legal ways, she said. We can talk to a lawyer you trust, we can document everything, we can go to the police once we have something concrete. I shook my head, the panic rising again. If they find out I went to the police too soon, they'll change it. They'll switch the plan, and I won't see it coming. Beatrice studied me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, So you think they're close? Yes, I whispered. I can feel it. The kitchen fell silent except for the faint hum of her refrigerator. Outside, a car passed, and the normal sound felt almost insulting. Beatrice's gaze sharpened again. Then we need a strategy that buys you time, she said. A strategy that makes them think they've won, without giving them a chance to finish the job. I stared at her, not understanding yet, but sensing the shape of something dangerous and strange. Beatrice hesitated, as if weighing whether to speak the next thought out loud. Then she did. There's one way to expose a conspiracy, she said, voice low. You let them show their hand. My mouth went dry. How? Beatrice looked at me carefully. By creating a situation where they believe their plan worked, she said. And then you watch what they do next. The idea hit me like cold water. You mean, I began, but I couldn't finish. Beatrice didn't flinch. I mean something that looks final, she said. Something they can't resist acting on. I sat very still, my heart pounding. My mind leapt to the words in the car: funeral, sell the house, insurance, like the pieces were already trying to assemble themselves into a picture. "You're talking about me disappearing," I whispered. Beatrice nodded once. "Yes." Fear surged through me immediately, sharp and instinctive. "That's insane," I said. Beatrice, that's dangerous." "It is," she agreed. "Which is why we don't do anything reckless. We don't do anything without planning and safeguards." "But Lydia, listen to me. If they're truly this committed, waiting and hoping they'll change is not a plan. It's a prayer. And prayers are not enough when people are greedy." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say no. But the truth was, in the last week, I had watched my son's eyes measure my home, heard my brother's bitterness sharpen into entitlement, and felt Raquel's calm like ice. If they had already decided my death was a solution, then my safety depended on me being smarter than their cruelty. Beatrice squeezed my hand again. "Before we even consider anything dramatic," she said, "we start with control. We secure your documents. We make copies. We get your valuables out. We change locks if you need to. We tell someone official, that you fear for your safety. Even if they don't act immediately, it creates a record. A trail." "A trail," I echoed. "Yes," she said. "And we gather evidence. Not just notes. Evidence that stands up outside your head." The word outside mattered. Because inside my head, everything was screaming. For the next 2 hours, Beatrice and I talked through the simplest steps first. She told me to stop keeping important papers where I always had. She told me to take photos of them, copy them, and store them somewhere secure. She told me to write down every interaction with dates and times. She told me to keep my phone close and charged, and to avoid being alone on the stairs if Javier and Raquel came over again. It sounded almost ordinary when she said it that way, like prevention, like common sense. But underneath, it was war preparation. When I finally stood to leave, my legs felt weak but my mind felt clearer. "Lydia," Beatrice said, following me to the door, "promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you will not confront them alone," she said. "Not your son, not your brother, not anyone. Confrontation without proof just gives them a reason to paint you as unstable. You understand?" I nodded, throat tight. "I understand." She paused, then added, "And promise me you won't go back to pretending you're safe. You can act normal. You can smile. But inside you stay alert. You are not crazy. You are not imagining this. Your instincts saved you once in that car. They'll save you again." I walked home with the strange feeling of carrying 2 lives inside me, the life where I was just Lydia, the hard-working mother who believed love could fix everything, and the new life where Lydia was a woman who had to outthink her own family. That evening, Javier texted me a cheerful message about how nice dinner was, and how they should do it more often. The words looked sweet on a screen. I could almost hear a version of him that meant them. But now I knew better than to trust sweetness without context. I replied with something simple and harmless. I put the phone down and went to my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept my papers and stared at the folders like they were suddenly evidence, not just paperwork. I pulled them out one by one: insurance, bank statements, the deed to my home, and my hands trembled as I handled them. This was what they wanted. Not my memories. Not my love. Not even my presence in their lives. Numbers. I made copies the next day at a small shop across town where nobody knew me. I kept the originals hidden in a place I had never used before. I wrote down exactly where everything was, and I told Beatrice. If something happened to me, she would know what to look for and what it meant. In the following days, I practiced my normal. I answered Javier's calls with warmth. I laughed at Raquel's shallow comments. I let Alvin believe I was still the sister he could intimidate. It was a performance, but it was a performance designed for survival. And slowly, the opportunity one needed began to form. Because when people believe they are close to winning, they get careless. Javier called again midweek, voice gentle. "Mom," he said, "Raquel and I were thinking, we could come by this weekend, help you fix a few things." That rug, the lighting, stuff like that. My blood cooled instantly. He was trying to put his hands on my home again. He was trying to control the scene. But I kept my voice light. That's sweet, I said. You don't have to, Mijo. I'm fine. Please, he insisted too quickly. We just worry. Worry. Another word that sounded false. Now. After I hung up, I called Beatrice and told her. There was a pause on the line, and then she said, "They're tightening the net." "I know," I whispered. Beatrice's voice stayed calm. "Then we keep building ours," she said. "And Lydia, if you decide you're ready to disappear for a while, we will make sure you come back." That night, I stood at the bottom of my stairs and looked up. The steps rose neatly, familiar as a song, yet now they felt like a threat wrapped in wood and carpet. I placed my hand on the railing and felt the smooth surface under my palm. For 30 years, those stairs had carried me through ordinary life, up to bed when I was exhausted, down to the kitchen when Javier was hungry, up again when he had nightmares, down again when the phone rang with bad news. They had never been my enemy, but my family had chosen them as a weapon. And in the quiet of my home, with the lights turned on bright as day, I made a decision that tasted like iron. If they wanted an ending, I would give them one, but it would not be my end. It would be the beginning of theirs. Once the decision settled into me, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt heavy and deliberate, like lifting something you know will change the shape of your back forever. I didn't rush. I didn't announce anything. I moved quietly, the way I always had when survival required patience instead of speed. The first thing Beatrice insisted on was secrecy, not just from my family, but from everyone who didn't absolutely need to know. The fewer people who know, she said, the fewer loose ends there are to betray you. She had spent her career watching what happens when too many hands get involved in fragile situations. I trusted her judgment the way you trust gravity. We met again the following morning, this time with notebooks, lists, and the seriousness of two women who understood there would be no second chances if we made mistakes. Beatrice spoke carefully, measuring each word. "If we're going to do something that looks final," she said, "it has to be controlled, documented, and reversible. Otherwise, it's not a plan. It's a gamble." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "I won't gamble with my life," I said. "That's exactly why I'm here," she replied. "We talked through scenarios the way people talk through emergency procedures, not with excitement but with respect for risk. What would my family expect if something happened to me? Who would they call? How would they behave? What steps would they rush to take once they believed I was gone?" The answers came easily now. Insurance. The house. The will. They had already shown us their priorities in the way they spoke and the questions they asked. "What we need," Beatrice said, tapping her pen against the table, "is a moment that convinces them without giving them the opportunity to interfere." I understood immediately what she meant. If my family was present, if they were involved, if they could touch or see or manipulate the situation, it would be too dangerous. Whatever happened had to happen when they were elsewhere, distracted, confident. "Sunday," I said suddenly. Beatrice looked up. "Why Sunday?" "Every Sunday, Javier and Raquel go to her parents' house," I said. "They're always there for hours. They've never missed it." Beatrice considered that. "Predictability," she said. "That's good." The next question was the hardest one, the one neither of us wanted to speak too quickly. "What exactly would final look like?" she asked gently. I closed my eyes for a moment. The image that came to me wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It was quiet. "A heart attack," I said. "That's what they expect. That's what they've already rehearsed." Beatrice nodded slowly. "It's common. It's plausible. And unfortunately, it's rarely questioned." The room went quiet after that, the weight of what we were discussing pressing down on us. I was talking about faking my own death. Even thinking the words felt surreal, like stepping outside the edges of a normal life. "I need you to understand something," Beatrice said firmly. "I will not help you do anything that puts you in irreversible danger." "I know," I replied. "I wouldn't ask you to." She took a breath. There are ways to simulate a medical emergency convincingly enough for first responders, especially if the person is older and has lived under long-term stress, she said. But they require precision, timing, supervision. And even then, there's risk. I didn't look away. There's risk either way. That was when Beatrice truly committed. I saw it in her posture, in the way her voice steadied. Then we do this the safest way possible, she said. And we document everything so that when you come back, there's no question about why you did it. The days that followed blurred together into preparation. We moved carefully, methodically, as if we were assembling something fragile that could shatter if handled roughly. Beatrice handled the medical side with professional restraint, explaining what she could and could not do, what symptoms could be mimicked safely, and what lines could never be crossed. I listened closely, memorizing every instruction like it was a lifeline. At the same time, I continued my performance for my family. When Javier called, I answered warmly. When Raquel suggested changes to my house, I thanked her. I let them believe I was still pliable, still predictable, still the woman who would never imagine her own child capable of cruelty. I hated myself a little for how convincing I sounded, but I hated the alternative more. 3 days before Sunday, Javier called again. Mom, he said, his tone unusually affectionate, we're thinking of stopping by next week. Maybe help you organize some paperwork. Paperwork, I smiled into the phone. That's thoughtful, I said. But I think I've got it under control. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. Are you sure? Yes, I replied lightly. I'm learning to be independent in my old age. He laughed, but it sounded forced. You've always been independent. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. His unease confirmed what Beatrice and I already knew. They were getting impatient. Sunday arrived quietly. No thunder. No warning signs. Just a soft morning light and the sound of birds outside my window, as if the world had no idea what I was about to do. Beatrice arrived early, carrying a small bag that looked ordinary enough to anyone else. To me, it felt like a line between two lives. Are you still sure? She asked me one last time. I looked around my living room, the couch where I'd rested after double shifts, the photos of Javier as a boy, the plant I'd kept alive longer than any other thing in my life. I'm sure, I said. If I don't do this, I'll spend every day waiting to die. She nodded. Then we proceed. The process itself was strangely calm. Beatrice worked with the focus of a professional who had done difficult things before, though never like this. She monitored me closely, explaining each step as she went, her voice steady, grounding me. You'll feel very tired, she said. Your body will slow down. You may hear things without being able to respond. That's normal. That's why I'll be here the entire time. I lay down on the living room floor, positioned carefully to look natural, like someone who had collapsed suddenly. The carpet felt cool against my skin. The ceiling above me looked unfamiliar from that angle, like I was seeing my own home from a stranger's perspective. As the minutes passed, the world softened. Sounds stretched and blurred. My body felt heavy, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Panic flickered briefly, an instinctive protest, but Beatrice's voice cut through it. You're okay, she said softly. Everything is going according to plan. I held on to that voice like a rope. When she called emergency services, I could hear the urgency in her tone, perfectly calibrated, not hysterical, but frightened enough to be believable. She described finding me unresponsive, describing my age, my stress, my living alone. Every word fit the story my family had already written in their heads. The sirens came. Even through the haze, the sound made my heart try to race, though my body no longer obeyed me. Doors opened. Voices entered my home, professional, efficient, detached. I felt hands on my wrist, on my neck, on my chest. I heard murmured phrases. No pulse. Shallow breathing. Time unknown. I wanted to scream that I was still there, still alive, still me. But I trusted Beatrice. I trusted the plan. I stayed still, surrendered to the terrifying vulnerability of being mistaken for dead. When the words finally came, "I'm sorry," they echoed through me like a bell. To that moment, Lydia Monroe officially ceased to exist. I woke hours later in Beatrice's basement, my body aching and my mouth dry as sand. The first thing I saw was her face, lined with exhaustion and relief. "It worked," she said softly. "They declared you dead." The reality hit me slowly, like cold water seeping in around my ankles. "Dead," I repeated. She nodded. "The certificate's been signed. To the world, you're gone." I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity was overwhelming. "I've never been so alive," I said hoarsely. Beatrice helped me sit up, monitored my recovery with the same careful attention she'd given everything else. When I was steady enough, she handed me a phone. "I recorded the call," she said. "The one I made for Javier." My hands trembled as I pressed play. Her voice came through first, calm but shaken. "Javier, it's Beatrice. I'm so sorry to tell you this. Your mother passed away this afternoon." There was silence on the line, long enough to notice. Then Javier spoke. "What happened?" His voice sounded controlled, almost relieved. "It looks like a heart attack," Beatrice said. "The paramedics said it was quick." "I see," he replied. "Thank you for letting me know. Raquel and I will take care of everything." No sobbing. No disbelief. No breaking voice. When the recording ended, I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. "That's not grief," I whispered. Beatrice shook her head. "No," she said. "It's confirmation." Over the next 2 days, from my hidden place beneath her house, I watched my family become exactly who they had always been beneath the surface. Beatrice had installed discreet cameras before everything happened. Small, careful devices placed where they would capture the truth without announcing themselves. When Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia entered my house together, there was no hesitation. No moment of silence. No reverence. They moved like people entering a property they already owned. They spoke openly, greedily. They laughed. They talked about the house like inventory. About my belongings like clutter. About my life, like an inconvenience that had finally resolved itself. When Patricia said she was surprised I hadn't died sooner, something in me snapped. Not into rage, but into clarity. Any lingering doubt evaporated. There was no misunderstanding here. No gray area. No tragic mistake. They had wanted me gone. And now, believing they had succeeded, they were revealing themselves without masks. Javier called the insurance company. Raquel planned the sale. Alvin searched for documents. They divided percentages like shareholders. I recorded everything. Every word. Every laugh. Every Lied. By the time they left my house that day, it no longer felt like my home. It felt like evidence. That night, Beatrice brought me tea and sat beside me on the basement couch. "What do you want to do next?" she asked quietly. I thought of the stairs. Of the cake. Of the boy Javier used to be. Of the man he had become. "I want the truth to be seen," I said. "Not whispered. Not buried. Seen." She studied me. "Publicly." "Yes," I said. "They planned my death in private. They celebrated it in private. I want my return to happen where they can't hide." Beatrice smiled then. Not with joy, but with fierce approval. "Then we involve someone who understands exposure," she said. "Who?" "A journalist," she replied. "And Lydia, when you walk back into your life, you won't just be coming back for yourself. You'll be coming back for every person who was ever told to stay quiet for the sake of family." I leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of everything I had done and everything still to come. I had died once. Now I was choosing how to be reborn. And this time, I would not be invisible. The days after my death moved with a strange double rhythm. Above ground, my family hurried through paperwork and phone calls, eager to turn grief into currency. Below ground, in Beatrice's quiet basement, time slowed and thickened, each hour stretching as I watched the truth unfold on small screens. I slept little. When I did sleep, I dreamed of staircases that never ended and voices calling my name from rooms I could not enter. Beatrice brought me updates like a doctor delivering test results. Javier had scheduled an appointment with a real estate agency. Raquel had begun shopping for furniture online. Alvin had complained about how long banks took to process things. Patricia had joked, openly, about how finally things were going their way. Each piece of information settled into me like a stone, heavy but clarifying. There was no room left for doubt, no space for denial to hide, and the third day, Beatrice sat beside me with her laptop open, her expression serious but calm. "They're planning a meeting," she said. "A formal one." My chest tightened. "What kind of meeting?" "A will reading," she replied. "Or at least that's what they're calling it." Javier told Alvin they should all be present to finalize distributions. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it. My son organizing a meeting to divide my life while my body was still officially cold, was too sharp to hurt anymore. "When?" I asked. "Saturday," Beatrice said. "At your house." My house. The words echoed inside me, hollow and distant. "That's perfect," I said slowly. Beatrice studied me. "Perfect can be dangerous," she warned. "I know," I replied. "But it's also poetic." We both understood what this meant. This was the moment everything had been moving toward, the point where their certainty would be complete. They would gather, confident and unguarded, believing the story was finished. That was when the truth would have the most power. Beatrice nodded once. "Then we prepare for exposure," she said. The preparation was meticulous. Beatrice contacted a journalist she trusted, a woman named Maria Elena Vargas, known for investigative work and an intolerance for half-truths. When Maria Elena arrived quietly one evening, she brought with her not just curiosity, but skepticism, the healthy kind. She listened as Beatrice explained the situation, then turned her sharp gaze on me. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, "people lie to me every day. If I'm going to put my reputation on the line, I need to know this isn't just a family dispute blown out of proportion." I met her eyes. "I understand," I said. "That's why I brought evidence." We showed her everything. The recordings from the car. The conversations from my house. The phone calls with insurance companies. The laughter. The plans. The numbers. Maria Elena didn't interrupt. She took notes, paused the footage, rewound sections, her expression hardening with every minute. When the final recording ended, she exhaled slowly. "This isn't a dispute," she said. "This is a conspiracy." "Yes," I replied. "And I want it seen." She leaned back in her chair. "If we do this," she said, "there's no controlling what comes after. Your family will be exposed publicly. You'll be exposed too. There will be opinions, judgment, chaos." "I've already lived through chaos," I said quietly. "This is the order." Maria Elena nodded. "Then we do it right," she said. "Live coverage. Law enforcement present. No room for denial." The days leading up to Saturday were the hardest. Not because of fear, but because of memory. Alone in Beatrice's basement, I had too much time to remember the boy Javier once was. The way he used to fall asleep with his head on my shoulder, the way he'd bring me crooked drawings and announce they were masterpieces. I mourned that boy more deeply than I mourned my own death. Somewhere along the way, he had been buried under ambition and entitlement, and I didn't know if prison bars would ever reach him. Saturday arrived bright and unremarkable. I dressed carefully, choosing a red dress I had once worn to Javier's wedding, not out of nostalgia, but defiance. I wanted to look alive. I wanted to look undeniable. Beatrice adjusted my hair, her hands steady. "Are you ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I've been ready since the moment they planned my funeral," I said. The camera crew arrived quietly, their equipment packed discreetly. Police officers waited nearby, informed and prepared. Maria Elena reviewed the plan one final time. "We go in when they're already talking," she said. "The shock matters. The timing matters." From the monitor, I watched my family arrive at my house. Alvin and Patricia first, carrying folders and an air of satisfaction. Javier and Raquel followed, dressed neatly, composed, already acting like people with nothing to hide. They settled into my living room, the same room where I had celebrated birthdays, wrapped gifts, collapsed after long days of work. Javier cleared his throat and began speaking with false solemnity. "We're here to discuss my mother's estate," he said. "As you know, she named me sole heir, but we've agreed to distribute things fairly." Raquel smiled, her posture relaxed. Patricia opened her notebook. Alvin leaned back, already calculating. Maria Elena touched my arm. "Now," she said. We walked. The sound of my key turning in the lock echoed through the house, cutting through their conversation like a blade. Silence followed, thick, confused, uneasy. I stepped inside, the cameras rolling, the lights bright, the truth walking on its own legs. Raquel saw me first. Her scream tore through the room, raw and unfiltered. Javier stood so abruptly that his chair fell backward. Papers scattered across the floor like startled birds. Alvin froze. Patricia began sobbing, not in relief, but in terror. "Hello," I said calmly. "I hope I'm not late." Maria Elena stepped forward. "This is Maria Elena Vargas, Channel 7 News," she announced. "We are broadcasting live." Javier stared at me, his face drained of color. "Mom," he whispered. You're dead." "So you believed," I replied. "That's interesting." Raquel's knees buckled and she collapsed onto the couch. "This isn't real," she sobbed. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's real," I said. "Just like the plans you made to kill me." Javier shook his head violently. "That's not true." I lifted my phone and pressed play. His own voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable, describing my believable accident. Raquel's words followed. Patricia's laughter. Alvin's agreement. Each sound struck like a hammer. The police stepped forward. Javier Ruiz, Raquel Ollie, Alvin Monroe, Patricia Taylor, an officer said, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The room erupted. Raquel screamed. Patricia pleaded. Alvin tried to speak but found no words. Javier looked at me then, not as a son, but as a man cornered by his own choices. "Mom," he said, tears streaming now. "Please. I didn't mean it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the final piece of my heart settle into place. "You meant it enough to plan it," I said. "You meant it enough to celebrate it." As they were led away, Maria Elena turned to me. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, microphone steady, "why did you do this?" I faced the camera, my voice clear. "Because love does not require silence in the face of violence," I said. "And because family does not mean permission to destroy." The story exploded. News stations replayed the footage. Social media argued and analyzed. Some called me brave. Some called me cruel. I didn't read most of it. I didn't need strangers to understand me anymore. The trial that followed was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Guilty verdicts came one by one, heavy and final. When Javier was sentenced, he did not look at me. When I left the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in decades. I sold the house. I moved closer to Beatrice. I donated much of what I had to help women like the one I used to be. Tired, invisible, determined. I built a new life from the truth instead of fear. Sometimes at night, I think about the woman who hid in the back seat of a car with a chocolate cake in her hands. I want to reach back through time and tell her this. You will survive. You will not disappear. You will not be quiet. And my name is Lydia Monroe. I died once to learn how to live. And this time, my life belongs to me.